Yes. Let's move on though. We're a film podcast, so I guess we're not going to talk about space. We'll just mention it. It was a Channel 4 sitcom. It ran for 2 series, 1999 to 2000 or 2000 2001, around about then.
Sounds about right.
With Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, and all the episodes directed by Edgar Wright. It's kind of where their friendship and their on-screen and off-screen partnership really started. It's the start of Nick Frost and Simon Pegg on screen together, and it's also what, in a way, gave rise to Shaun of the Dead, it being inspired by one of the episodes. So we'll move on to Shaun of the Dead then.
Yes, which Edgar Wright co-writes. This is the first in the Three Flavours Cornetto trilogy with Pegg, and can be fairly succinctly described, as you mentioned, as space with zombies, and there's a whole episode that is basically just the pilot for this, I suppose. And, well, I suppose that makes sense as long as you've seen that Channel 4 sitcom. Otherwise, sitcom romance in a zombie apocalypse will have to do you as a recap, I suppose. Before the dead start walking the earth, we are introduced to High Street electronic outlet sales assistant Shaun Pegg in the midst of his utterly familiar daily routine. The daily bus ride to work is filled with the half asleep, and the slog through work filled with the half witless. Then, quiet bite down the local with his slob of a fat mate Eric, played by Nick Frost, his girlfriend Liz, Kate Ashfield, who's pining for a more interesting and stimulating life, and also her flatmates, the objectionable David, Dylan Moran, and the agreeable Diane, Lucy Davis. And I'm sure for a majority of people, certainly those who've been sold into the wage slavery of modern day working, this will seem like a familiar setup. Admittedly, perhaps not right now, but yeah. Business picks up when overnight the sleepy English suburbs are overrun by the old school lurching, flesh-chomping inconveniences that are zombies, and while many of the best gags come from Shaun and Ed's blind ignorance of the zombie menace as they recover from a night of heavy drinking caused by the breakdown of Shaun and Liz's relationship, it's not long before the two decide to take on the zombies, save Liz, David, Diane, Shaun's mum Barbara, played by Penelope Wilton, and stepdad Philip, played by Bill Nighy. Now, a lot of the most obvious humour in Shaun of the Dead comes from taking a rather more grounded look at how ordinary Joes would respond to such a crisis, rather than the usual horror movie tropes and or becoming an action hero overnight. On that basis, it's funny enough, although, as with my first viewing through, if you can only take that surface reading of it, then it's a fine enough comedy to be worth a look. However, for podcast reasons, I've since seen a lot more of the films that this affectionately prods fun at, as well as having seen it a few more times now, and it's certainly pulled itself up a couple of notches in my estimation from that first viewing back in the day, not only for cleverly twisting the films that it's drawing from into amusing pretzels, but also for baking a rich and dense dough with quick throwaway gags and Easter eggs that reward repeat viewing, as well as genre aficionados. Now, it's not my favourite of their cornettos, but the more I watch of it, the less of a delta there is between this and Hot Fuzz, in my estimation, and I would certainly recommend it very widely, and of course, in particular to horror movie fans in general. We've spoken about this film at least once before, and I think in our previous podcast as well. So we have... I probably won't spend too much on it other than to say that I quite like it. It is quite funny, and you can certainly see more than this than in Fistful of Fingers, the sort of Edgar Wright style. Lots of quick cuts and zooms and sort of really densely packed gags, lots of things to unfold in it, and yeah, it's just really quite enjoyable. And routinely mentioned as probably the best kind of horror comedy type thing, up there with the Evil Dead 2 and well, probably just that. And yeah, it's certainly well worth viewing, and yeah, get it seen if you've not done it already.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty much the gold standard horror comedy. Not that there are all that many of them, because the other ones at least tend to fail both in horror and a comedy. It's and yeah, it's got to be pretty high up for quality pastiche as well. Not quite hitting the Hot Fuzz states. I was like fairly... I was going to say nonplussed by this at first, but that's not fair. I thought it was reasonable. But like you, Scott, with like more knowledge, I've come to appreciate this a lot more.
Yeah.
And then even just like the technical aspects, for the most part, Edgar Wright hasn't gone out of his way to dissuade people from the idea that this was his debut feature, and you can see why, because it would have been a hell of an accomplished debut feature. It's got a clever script because there's all that foreshadowing there. Again, I don't know, because we covered it on our Zombies podcast a couple of years ago. I'm not going to go too much into either, but a lot of foreshadowing in the dialogue, but stuff that would just seem entirely reasonable normal stuff unless you knew what it meant. And it's like really great, the scene transitions and the clever editing, and then it's that, like for instance, the little fun sequence of Shaun sitting changing the channels on the TV, but it's still managing to spell out the story of what's actually happening.
Yeah,
it's a really clever, like, 'cause that serves both a narrative function and a comedy function, and it's really well done.
Yeah,
and it's also there's a lot of Edgar Wright stuff I noticed watching all these again in quick succession too. What is that he does a really good job, and the script helps too, but generally he's involved with him and Simon Pegg for a lot of them. But they do a lot of storytelling visually. You know, they don't have to spell things out to the audience.
Yes, he treats his audience with some sort of modicum of intelligence.
Absolutely, yeah. It's so there is that, like, just like you show a picture or something. It's like, right, I get that, and it's not have to be drawn attention to or spelled out of anything. And right, there are certain situations in films where you'd have to have a dialogue to explain it if something complex is happening. But he seems to be so acutely aware that cinema is a visual medium, so he thinks, maybe I'll let pictures do the storytelling where I can, and it's really notable watching them all again in quick succession, as I said. And yeah, it's the first real example of his well, film-wise, there's some of it in space, although not as much. Space is a bit more conventional, but of his ability to choreograph action with music, which is often really funny. It's also very entertaining. Again, like I mentioned before in their other podcast, John in the pub when they're playing Queen and hitting him with the pool cues. It's just, it's so entertainingly done. And that's a real trait that goes through all these films. Yeah, it's really fun. I like it much more now than I did at first, and I thought it was not bad at first. There's a lot of care in there. There's a lot of knowledge too about the genre they're taking the mickey out of. Although I find I still don't know if dogs can look up or not. It fails to answer this question.
I think I wouldn't have a lot to add to what you're saying. I think it's his dependency on visual storytelling that makes the repeat reviewing so rewarding. Mm-hmm. And I've only seen Shaun of the Dead maybe 3 times or so, and I didn't rewatch it recently for this podcast because I haven't necessarily had the time. But it's my second favourite of his canon, and I think we're probably all heading in the same direction as to what our first favourite would be. And in the instance of that film also, I would say the same about this. Is I think his work is the strongest where he is lampooning the sort of everyday aspects of British life within a broader context of, some sort of genre movie. So it's very obvious that he's got a great deal of affection for the place we all come from. I would say more specifically English life, but I think you can expand that a little more broadly to the British experience.
It's not hugely different in the broad strokes, I don't think.
No, and I think that's where he's the strongest, and that's the primary reason why I find this has just got an awful lot more heart than some of his other work, and we'll talk more about his more, I guess you could say, Americanized works as bigger budget stuff. But I don't think it's any real surprise that I find his UK set films far more enjoyable and rewarding in that sense. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily add a lot more to what you've got to say. I haven't particularly watched a great deal of the movies that would have informed this, but I think that, if anything, then bears testament to how much I have enjoyed watching this, that without having that background knowledge necessarily, or the depth of it, that I still found it to be a rewarding experience, which kind of suggests that it's a pretty well made film.
I think that Shaun of the Dead is one of those films that's well served simply by the general cultural osmosis of like touchstone zombie films.
Yes,
there are tropes that
I've probably seen enough. Yeah,
so much other culture, TV, video games, other films too, that I think you can pick up on a lot of the stuff, and it's for aficionados the smaller stuff. But
yeah,
I think Scott and I have both had the benefit of having done that Zombies episode a couple of years ago, where we watched all of of these zombie films and really get like, oh right, so that's what that's about.
Yeah,
and it makes you appreciate it more.
I don't think my wife has ever watched another zombie movie, and she loves Shaun of the Dead, so I suspect that also speaks to the fact that extra element, that extra layer is there. If you are more broadly educated in that genre of film, then
yes,
clearly you will get more from it. But I wouldn't want to suggest that, you know, not having that knowledge should put you off wanting to watch it, because it's not really a zombie movie at heart, I suppose. It operates well enough on the level just purely of emotional storytelling to be satisfying, regardless of whether you have that inverted commas education or otherwise. So, yes, a very good movie indeed.